Neuropathology.
Neuropathology is the study of the brain. I specialize in diseases of the brain and traumatic brain injuries, as well as the spinal cord and eye and nerve.
And what is your current position right now at OMI?
I'm the chief medical examiner at the OMI.
Doctor, have you been qualified as an expert in court before?
Yes.
Do you know how many times?
I have testified roughly in court and in depositions between 40 and 50 times.
And what are you an expert in, or what have you been qualified as an expert in?
Forensic pathology.
Your Honor, at this point, the state would move to qualify Dr. Jarrell as an expert in forensic pathology.
And defense, any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, Dr. Heather Jarrell will be certified by this court as an expert in forensic pathology.
Doctor, in November of 2019, let me back up. You said you're the chief medical examiner now. How long have you been in that role?
I was appointed permanent chief in January 2021.
Back in November of 2019, what was your role at OMI?
I was a forensic pathologist.
And what were your basic job duties as a forensic pathologist?
At that time, my duties were to perform autopsies to determine cause and manner of death. We also have a fellowship program at the OMI, so I supervised doctors who were in their fellowship, and which is the capacity that I was involved in this field stuff.
Let's go to the autopsy of Miss Vigil. Did the Office of the Medical Examiner receive her body around November 19th of 2019?
Yes.
And doctor, when a body is found at a crime scene, who is in charge of that body at the scene?
That would be the Office of the Medical Investigator, and we send an investigator to the scene.
So at Ms. Vigil's residence where she was found deceased, there was someone from your office there to supervise the handling of her body there?
Yes.
And when her body was received actually at your physical office, what happened? Tell us just a little bit about what happens to a body when it arrives and what happened with Miss Vigil.
Yes, a body is received in a sealed body bag, which ensures that no one has tampered with potential evidence on the body. And we also perform a full body postmortem CT, which will allow us to determine injuries internally and natural disease internally.
For Miss Vigil's autopsy, who actually performed that autopsy?
The autopsy was performed by Dr. Ben Murray with my oversight and supervision.
And were you present in the autopsy room with Dr. Murray the entire time?
Yes.
And did you review that doctor's findings with him?
Yes.
Did you agree with his findings?
Yes.
Was a report prepared after her autopsy was completed?
Yes.
And was that report reviewed and verified by yourself?
Yes.
And you personally approved and signed off on that report?
Yes.
Doctor, can you walk us through once the body is in the room for an autopsy, just generally tell us like the parts of the autopsy that happen.
The first part of the autopsy consists of an external examination where we document how a decedent is received at the OMI, whether they're clothed, whether there's any defects to the clothing that might be relevant to the cause of death. We also collect any trace evidence at that time in suspicious cases. That would include fingernail clippings, hair samples. We also document general features of the decedent, such as hair color, eye color, and any external injuries or other natural disease findings that we can see externally. We also take a height and a weight of every decedent. Then we proceed with the internal examination after we've documented injuries and characterized those. The internal examination consists of looking at any internal injuries and looking at any natural disease findings. We also collect samples for toxicology during that time. And then we also collect little pieces of tissue that are submitted for examination under the microscope.
And are there steps taken within the autopsy room or suite to prevent contamination? Explain kind of what you're wearing and how you guys do that.
Yes, we wear coverings, essentially our entire body. We also collect evidence in a way to try to avoid contamination of DNA of our own DNA on the evidence collection.
May I approach him?
You may.
Doctor, I'm going to show you what's been previously marked and conditionally admitted as states 127, 128, 129, 130, 131, and 132. Slightly out of order. If you could take a look at these and tell me if you recognize those.
Yes.
And then also what's been marked for identification with states 138 through 146. And Doctor, are those photographs of evidence collected during Ms. Vigel's autopsy and also photographs of her that were taken during the autopsy?
Yes.
And are those a correct and accurate reflection of how everything was on that day?
Yes.
Now, the state would move for admitting, move to admit states 127 and 132, which were previously conditionally admitted through our firearms expert, and move for admission of states 138 through 146.
Just go ahead. Defense?
No objection, Judge, based on our prior discussions.
Okay, and so do you still have the objection as to relevance?
Yes.
Okay, I will overrule, and the more prejudicial and probative, I will overrule the defendant's objection and and I will admit 127 through 132, 138, 139, 140, 141, 142, 143, 144, 145, and 146 at this time, overruling the defendant's objection as to relevance and that they are more prejudicial and probative, and you may publish.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Carroll, we have a little camera right here. I'm going to ask if we can just walk through these photos, starting with 138. So we just put them here. And I'll just let you go through them kind of one at a time. Can you explain what 138 is?
Yes, this is a photograph of Ms. Vigil while she was received. She's clothed, and you'll note that the investigator at the scene has placed handbags over the hands to preserve any potential evidence on the hands.
Okay. 139.
This is an overall photo of Ms. Vigil at the scene, or as she was received from the scene.
140.
And these are arm bags that were placed, these are bands that were placed on the wrist. One is placed on the wrist at the scene, and the second is placed on the wrist once the body is received at the OMI, because we add our case number.
And my next question is going to be, is this number, is that your OMI case number related to Ms. Vigel's autopsy?
Yes.
141.
Once the handbags are, I'm sorry.
What's it?
I'll wait till my
No, what's 141?
Okay. Once the handbags are removed, we also take photographs of the hands. She had a clear plastic bag on her right hand.
And before we move to 142, let me ask you, did Ms. Vigil have an obvious injury?
Yes.
Okay. And where was that injury?
She had a gunshot wound to the left side of her head.
Okay. And let's go ahead and publish 142. Can you tell us about this photo, what it's depicting?
This is a close-up photo of a gunshot entrance wound on the left side of the head. And this is prior to us shaving the hair, which is what we typically do for gunshot entrance wounds.
Okay. And let me move to 143 and tell us what we're looking at here.
This is a photo of the gunshot entrance wound on the left side of the head as I'm demonstrating to you. We have gone in and shaved the hair around the entrance wound, and depicted is a central defect with what we call stellate or star-shaped laceration surrounding the entrance wound.
Is this a typical entrance wound for a gunshot?
It's a bit large. There are some abrasions that surround it, and could be consistent with an intermediate target.
Can you explain to the jury what an intermediate target is?
An intermediate target means that the projectile, otherwise known as bullet, passes through another object before it strikes a person.
Does that change the way you see, or the way entrance wounds kind of present, or how they're inflicted, I guess maybe a better way to put it?
They can appear large. They can, what we call atypical. Sometimes you can see, sometimes you can see what we call pseudo-stippling, which is as the projectile passes through something, for example, glass, the glass breaks and causes little abrasions on the skin. We didn't see that here, and that could be because there's a dense amount of hair on the head that could have prevented that.
Okay. So is this wound is consistent with that projectile having passed through one or more objects before it came here?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you 144. Can you explain what we're looking at here?
This is the skull. It is flipped over. So what you can appreciate is that there is internal beveling of the bone. That happens when a projectile goes through bone. And there are two, an inner table and an outer table of bone. When a projectile goes through the bone, it takes the inner table with it, and you see internal beveling of the bone, which is consistent with an entrance wound versus an exit wound.
Doctor, let me ask you a little bit about trajectory. Is trajectory something that you try to determine in an autopsy?
Yes.
And did you do that with Miss Vigil?
Yes.
Can you describe what you determined with regards to the projectile or the direction of that bullet into her?
Yes. The direction of wounding was left to right and downward.
Can you point maybe to your own head and just kind of show us how that would have gone in?
Yes.
Right there? Okay. Did that projectile come out of her?
No.
Where did you locate it?
We recovered projectile fragments from the base of the skull on the right, near the part of the brain called the cerebellum.
And I'm going to show you what's been admitted now as states 131. Are those the fragments that were pulled from inside of her head?
Yes.
And then also, or some of them, I guess, and then also 129. Is that also recovered from inside her head?
Yes.
And then tell us about 127. Where was this recovered from?
This projectile fragment was recovered from Miss Vigil's hair near the entrance wound.
Okay. I'm going to show you 145 and then also 146. Can you tell us a little bit about this item?
Yes, this was a hat that Miss Vigil was wearing, and there is a defect that corresponds to the gunshot entrance wound on the left side of the head.
So some of those little fragments that were sort of in her hair, were those sort of in between this hat and her?
Yes.
Okay. When you, looking back at these fragments that are recovered, they seem to have some weights listed on them. When you recover a missile or projectile at OMI, tell us just a little bit about the collection and why you weigh it. Or
At the OMI, we once the projectile is recovered, we weigh the projectile or projectile fragments in what we call grains. It's not grams, but grains. And we record that weight with the projectile and package the projectile.
okay. And were those items all packaged, sealed, and turned over to the Albuquerque police?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more. We've heard a little bit about the trajectory of the wound that Ms. Vigil sustained. Was that a lethal or a deadly wound that she was inflicted on her?
Yes.
In your opinion, or do you have an opinion on how quickly death would have occurred?
It would have been instantaneous with the injury.
And did you find anything else during the course of her autopsy that would have contributed to her death in any way?
No.
As far as autopsies go, was this a pretty straightforward, so to speak, finding for you?
Yes.
Doctor, can you tell us, you said at the beginning of your testimony that your job is to determine cause and manner of death. What does that mean? What is the cause and manner of death?
Cause of death is what ultimately resulted in a person's death, and such as COVID-19, a heart attack, those would be causes of death.
Okay. What was the cause of Jacqueline's death?
A gunshot wound to the head.
And what was the manner of her death?
Homicide.
We'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Okay, cross-examination, Ms. Reinhardt?
Your Honor, we don't have any cross-examination.
Okay. Any reason why this witness may not be excused?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. And Ms. Reinhardt?
No reason.
Okay, so Dr. Gerald, you're free to go. My dear. We can take about a 5-minute recess. So we can get Commander Hartsock back on the stand. All rise for the jury. Clear up, Parker. Okay, I'm going to make a brief phone call. And you can get Commander Hartsock back on, and I'll be right back.
Yes, sir.
It's like, where'd he go? State anything before we bring out the jury?
No, Your Honor.
Until? Okay. All rise for the jury.
What is that?
I think it's mine,
Oh,
because every time that I get close to it.
I'm not sure.
I just realized there was a...
Yeah, it's only been happening today. You may be seated. Cross-examination, Ms. Reinhardt.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Is it Commander Hartsock?
Yeah, okay.
Is Commander like, sounds very supreme and...
It does sound supreme, but I still answer to people.
Okay. All right. Could you clarify, you went over this on direct examination yesterday, but could you clarify what your role was? Because as I understood it, you worked for the APD.
During this investigation, I worked for the District Attorney's Office.
Okay, for this investigation.
Yeah, APD hired me
Afterwards,
this
okay.
investigation.
Because I was reviewing the dates that you worked for each agency, and I realized that you had not started to work, or that you had in fact been working for the DA's office at the time of this incident.
That's correct.
Okay. And it appears that you did not start working for APD until April 2021?
That's correct.
Okay. And so when you did, I think you did an interview of Mr. Ramirez, right?
Yes, I did a few interviews.
Did a couple of them actually. And the first one I think was in September 9th, 2020.
It was late September of 2020, and the second one was in October of 2020.
Okay.
So we went to his parents' house,
Right.
but he wasn't there.
Right.
And then we came back a few weeks later when they notified us he was there and we went to town.
So at the time you did those two interviews, you actually worked for the district attorney's office.
Yes, I was a police officer, but I was the special agent in charge of all the police officers at the DA's office, which was about 10 officers at the time.
Okay. And what was the purpose of you being a special agent with APD or with the DA's office?
The DA's office hired me to be there to manage all their police officers as a police officer. So I centered in all of the cops that were already working at the prosecutor's office into one unit, and we created an investigative unit. And again, I was their supervisor.
Okay. And in full disclosure, did you tell Isaac Ramirez or his parents that you were working for the prosecutors at the time you wanted to speak with him?
I believe I identified myself as working with the district attorney's office, but as a police officer, I had a badge and gun on during these meetings.
Okay. And because I noticed in reviewing the transcripts that I don't think there was any real discussion that I worked for the prosecutor's office when you interviewed Mr. Ramirez.
I haven't listened to him in that kind of detail to give you a good answer on it.
Okay.
I definitely would have presented as a police officer with FBI.
Okay, all right. And with FBI?
Because the FBI was with me.
Okay, and that was who?
Agent Ryan AC and Nancy Stemmel.
Okay.
Were the ones that were usually with me, and Nancy Stemmel spoke Spanish fluently, so she was there to help with any communication barriers that might have come up.
So was Mr. AC, was he was strictly with the FBI, he wasn't also with the DA's office?
He is a full-time special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Okay. And he was involved in both interviews, I think, of Isaac Ramirez.
He was not. He was only there
Just the
for
first one? Okay.
The second one, which is the video we watched at the table, that's just me and another agent with the DA's office.
Okay. And that's the one we watched a little bit of yesterday, right?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So this incident occurred in November 2019.
Yes.
So you didn't get on board until April 2021, right? Or did you come in even later than that?
Well, my role kind of changed. So again, the unit that I supervised was called CSU, the Crime Strategies Unit. We were involved with virtually every agency at the time because we analyzed and processed most of the cell phone and digital evidence, which in murder cases is on all of them. So from the first moments of the case, we were at least aware of it. We would meet with homicide detectives fairly often, but we didn't actually receive any material to analyze until around March, about 4 months later, involved in this case. I would start to become much more involved, and I would eventually take the case over in the summer of 2020, in June and July, so which is several months after the initial call to police.
So what was going on with this case from November 2019 until March 2021?
Well, I can't say exactly because I wasn't necessarily involved in it, but again, when I evaluated Zachary Bronco's phone and phone records, and then I listened to his interview, I was aware that the investigation believed he was the passenger in the car, and I disagreed with that assessment. And in speaking with the homicide detectives, they, to me, felt like the investigation was more or less over. They figured it out. It was Zachary Bronco and Mr. Talamantes. I thought there was more to explore, and so I started to explore other alternate facts that could exist to help explain what happened. And that's where I started to focus on Isaac Ramirez and the jail phone calls and everything else that led us down this path.
So, okay, and I understand that you did that, and that was starting in March, right, of 2021?
In the late spring, early summer.
Okay. So there was initial investigation around the date of the murder was conducted by Mike Luna, right?
Yes.
And Jose Lucero, right?
Those were the two homicide detectives.
Okay.
Yes.
And was that ongoing till March of 2021, or what? Or did it just, they did their initial investigation? Well, let me ask you this first. Did you review the entire file about this case to kind of get a timeline of what happened?
I did, but I didn't do that until late spring, early summer. Because I actually asked, I like to look at everything on the case, not just the cell phones. Can I look at everything, all the interviews, the police reports we're in today, where's our forensic testing, let's come back. Like, I want to do a cursory review of the whole case so I can better assess where it's at.
So I guess what I'm wondering is what was happening for most of the year that passed, 14 months, 15 months maybe, until you got on the case?
I mean, do you want to detail what happened to
Well,
the point, or I guess?
Officer Luna was initially involved, and Officer Jose was officially involved at the beginning.
Yeah, there's always a primary detective and a backup.
Right.
The primary was Luna, the backup was Lucero.
And so I guess the question is, was their investigation ongoing, or did it stop at a particular point after their initial involvement in the days surrounding the murder?
In my opinion, they just gotten stuck, essentially. The investigation had kind of come to a stop, essentially.
And when was that?
I don't know when it came to a stop, but at the time I started to assess it in early summer, I thought there was absolutely some things that could and needed to be done on the case, and that my unit was capable of following through on those things. And we still got assistance from UP, and FBI also assisted, but I started pushing forward regardless of where anyone else thought the case was at.
Right. Okay. So do you know why Officer Luna was no longer involved in the case?
At a certain point during the investigation, and it wasn't my decision, but the Albuquerque Police Department just asked for the DA's office investigators, which was my unit, just to fully take over the case. That way we have, and the analogy I always give is, we become the quarterback, right? We're the play caller, we know where everybody's positions are, we know what's going on, we try to know what the defense is doing. We got fully put in the game, which means it's not an advisory role. We're now taking control of the investigation to lead it.
But
And that's what happened around late June or July
of
2020, so
Okay.
several months after.
So, do you know why Mike Luna was no longer on the case? I understand how you got involved, but
No, I didn't make that decision. So I don't directly know, but I was happy to help take this case over and get it to a better point.
was it kind of an unusual circumstance?
Yes, it's unusual.
Okay. And you mentioned Mike Luna's. Well, let me ask you this: Did you have any specific knowledge as to why Jose Lucero was no longer on the case?
Well, he was always the backup detective to Loomis, so the way it works, and again, I now work at APD and I was just recently over their homicide unit, there's always just one detective in charge of a case, always just one, but they generally have a backup, and it's usually the same person for that case. So it wasn't unusual that if Mike Luna's not going to work it and they're going to give it to us, that Jose Lucero
They
would
both-
also fall off, essentially.
So they both would go.
Yeah, that wasn't unusual, but Detective Luna was still briefed on what was going on. I still spoke with him about developments that we had, but I was able to dictate the pace of the investigation now. No one else would decide that.
And do you know he's retired at this point?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know, in being involved in this case, whether he appeared for any pretrial interviews or anything of that nature?
May we approach?
Yes.
Why Mike Luna didn't appear for pretrial interviews?
So, I honestly, one, I don't know exactly who showed up for pretrial interviews and who didn't, and if someone didn't, I don't know why.
Okay. All right. So you spoke to us somewhat yesterday about this interview with Zachary Barrancas.
Yes.
And I reviewed that interview, and it was pretty chilling exchange of information, right?
You talking about the original interview?
Yeah.
With Luna Lucero?
Right.
Yeah, I listened to it, I had concerns about its validity.
And there was basically threats that he could face the death penalty, I think you said yesterday?
They implied that he could be executed by the government for his participation in this crime.
Okay. Did you see that in other interviews in this case?
Not that comes to the top of my head, no.
Okay. And at the end of the day, you determined that Barrancas wasn't involved at all.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could deal in absolutes of 100%, but I strongly believe that he was not involved in this case. Not just his statements, but the physical evidence that we had. None of it seemed to make sense.
Okay. And did you make that determination in part because he didn't have details that would be indicia of having knowledge of having been there, or?
Yes, that's correct. He didn't offer any original information in the interview. He simply just agreed with the detectives for the most part, which is a warning flag to someone who's watched lots of interviews. They teach interviews to cops. That's a red flag.
Okay. And this is not an uncommon experience, is it, where people will admit to something they absolutely didn't do?
It's something that has happened across our country. It has led to wrongful convictions of persons. I like to think I'm very sensitive to it. I appreciate a good interview, and I want to avoid the pitfalls of bad interviews because I think police have a duty to gather evidence, the right way and ethically to make sure that we do this correctly because someone's going to go to prison. This is a big deal.
It is a big deal. So, how many murder investigations have you done as...
I mean, I've been involved in hundreds of murder investigations in some role or another. I mean, recently I was the UPD's deputy commander over their homicide unit for the past 20 months, where we went through nearly 200 homicides during that time, and I was briefed up on every single one. We conduct investigative meetings 2 days after every murder to, in detail, go into what is the plan we're going to take going forward. So, to that extent, I've been involved in hundreds of them.
Okay. And so in this case, the collection of evidence, we've already had Andrea Ortiz come and testify about the collection of evidence in the case.
Okay.
And did you go over and review those kinds of reports, the criminalistics?
Oh yes, I looked at every photo that was taken that day, the video scans, I looked at the photos of when the Jeep was seized. Yes, I went through everything that was on the case.
Okay. And just another question about interviewing of suspects and witnesses. Well, in this case, we're talking suspects. Is there sort of and please, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but is there sort of, when you and say, for example, the FBI agent are interviewing someone like Isaac Ramirez, is there sort of a good cop, bad cop routine that you folks employ to speak with an interviewer?
No, I wish cops were that talented to be able to turn it on and turn it off. I generally haven't found that to be true. Usually our personalities just come out, and different cops have different personalities. Some can come in very, father-like and guardianship-like, like caricature almost. Some can come in as a big-time authority figure, right? Like, I'm the principal, and you better tell me what's going on. Different styles can work differently. I tend to want to encourage cooperation and encourage just a narrative storytelling from the person, and then I use follow-up questions just to clear things up at the end. I generally find most people do want to cooperate with police if they feel they're going to be believed. This goes for victims too. If they feel they're going to be believed, being taken serious, and that the person they're telling the story to is actively listening to what they're saying. People will admit to really terrible things if they feel trust with the person they're telling. So that is what I try to avoid. But every cop brings in their own personality and their own experience. But there's definitely not a, hey man, you go in hard and I'll come in and I'll like hug them. That kind of stuff doesn't, I've never seen it anyway happen.
I just noticed, like, in the first interview, there was a lot of, hey, bro. And I'm not sure if that was by you or the FBI agent, but it's kind of you know, everyone was a bro.
I'm from the South Valley, and I'm a little bit of a bro guy. You know?
You're a bro guy?
I wouldn't say it couldn't have been me, but I want them to feel comfortable. That's absolutely, I've interviewed people accused of murdering entire families, and I'm very, very nice to them in the interview. Even though what they did could have been real terrible.
In this case, you indicated you had spoken with Isaac's Ramirez's parents initially.
Yes.
And did you just have an informal conversation with them, or did you actually interview them?
Well, I mean, it was a recorded police conversation, so, but it was inside their living room. It was just a knock on the door. They allowed us in. Again, I brought, I think, Agent Iglesias with my agency who spoke Spanish because we weren't sure how good their English was. And it was just, I mean, it was formal, but it was in their living room.
Okay.
But there was no talks of charges or anything else. We said we think your son is a witness to a crime, and we really need to talk to him. It's really important, and we're probably going to keep coming back and knocking on your door. So help us talk to him.
And they didn't know where he was, right?
That's what they indicated.
Okay. And that was when?
That was in August of 2020, late August.
Okay. And what I understand from prior testimony is that they actually contacted you at some point and said he's here now, and you went and interviewed him.
A few weeks later, yeah, they contacted Agent Stemo with FBI, and she was Spanish speaking, so they contacted her and let her know, I believe in Spanish, that he was there, and then we all responded to the report.
Okay. And these folks were undocumented citizens, or non-citizens, I guess.
I never checked. I purposely didn't check because I didn't care about their immigration status. I just wanted to know what happened that night. But, yeah.
But Isaac was very concerned about that, right?
Isaac was concerned about it. Yeah, I don't say what he said, but yes, he was concerned.
And in discussing everything with him, he seemed to say that he was mostly concerned about his family.
I wouldn't say mostly, but I mean, it was absolutely on his mind. You know, he had lots of concerns, and I felt most of them were reasonable considering that the police and the FBI are in his parents' living room.
And I was reviewing that interview from September 2020, and there's a lot of discussion about Isaac wanting to have some kind of deal in place
Right.
before he spoke with you.
Yes.
And could you tell us about that?
Well, he asked if he gets a deal for talking, and this is before he had said anything, and I rebuffed it and said that we're not here for deals. I don't have the authority to give you a deal, which is true. A police officer can't make deals on what charges someone faces or what sentence they get. And I said, you have to tell us what you know first. Then I take that to a prosecutor, and ultimately they decide the value of a statement and what it's worth to get a deal. And I've done many of these investigations before that get played out in court, and so I try to make sure it was clear over and over again. I don't make deals. I don't give you deals. I'm a fact finder. I'm here to take a statement from you, like an honest statement. And again, you know the answers to a lot of these questions. So I need you to give me an honest, truthful statement of what you know. And I kept on that conversation until he finally started to give us a statement.
Okay, so in terms of the plea agreement that was eventually worked out in this case, did you have any specific input about that?
No, I briefed the prosecution team on what I had found. I provided the recordings of those interviews so they could review it themselves. Mr. Ramirez had never been arrested before by police. He didn't have a driver's license that I could find, so he wasn't in a government system. So during the second interview I had, I actually brought a crime scene tech with me to get his fingerprints and officially take his photos, so it wasn't booking him in jail, but I did want to be able to have better identifiers on him in case we needed that later on, because again, he was that kind of a ghost in the system until we showed up in his parents' apartment that day.
So in that interview, it was you and Brian AC, the FBI agent,
In the
right?
first interview.
In the first interview.
Yes.
And do you remember Brian saying basically, hey, we have your Snapchat, your phone number, we see where you've been in Albuquerque?
May we approach him, Jacqueline?
Sure.
Do you remember what Brian was discussing with Isaac about what they knew about him?
I was there, so I remember parts of it for sure.
Did you review your interviews prior to this appearance
I
today?
did go through some of the transcripts.
Okay, so-
I don't have them memorized though.
So do you remember what the FBI agent AC was discussing with Isaac?
May we approach?
Thank you, Judge. So in the interview that you and Brian AC were involved in, do you think some of the questioning was somewhat coercive?
No,
You don't think so?
I don't.
What in your recollection did you? What would be the purpose for asking questions that might be somewhat threatening
What would be
about immigration, about what they knew about him, that type of thing?
Ask me one more time.
Well, what would be the purpose of asking questions that would make Isaac obviously nervous? Questions about immigration or questions about the what police knew about him?
Well, I say asking questions that make someone nervous is hard, right? Because everyone in a police station was nervous. I don't know the person that is talking to a police officer who isn't nervous, so that's always going to be there. It is a strategy, though, by police to, again, establish to a person, I know the answers to some of these questions, right? To try to reduce that, I need you to be honest with me. But there's a difference of doing that and what happened in the Veronica interview, which was, I'm just going to tell you all the facts, and can you tell me if I'm right? It's a big difference. You know, I know things, but I want to hear it from you to see if we're on the same page versus I'm going to tell you everything and nod your head. And that's the difference of the two interviews, if you ask me.
So in this case, you said, we know things about you. Tell us what happened.
Well, things about you, the things about everything that happened that night, essentially. And we believe you were there, and we need to hear, we want your version of what happened.
Would an example be that, you know, we have cell phone records and we know where you were?
Yeah, introducing the possibility of evidence is absolutely a strategy, right? When I check cell phone records, what are they going to show me? When I look at the video surveillance, is your car going to be driving around? So you phrase things as if statements, right? When I check this, is this going to be there? And if you're the person deciding to talk or not, you have to really do that mental math really quick. If I don't answer truthfully right now, am I going to be on that video? This is going to look bad. So again, we're trying to induce the truth, credibility. I know certain things, please just give me the truth here, but I need you to move your mouth and make those sounds. I need to hear it from you.
Do you remember a discussion by both of you about what do you want to see happen here, Isaac?
Kind of, not all the specifics.
And then he said he wanted a signed paper.
Objection, Judge. Hearsay.
Let me ask it a different way. You have some memory of a discussion about what do you want?
Yeah, he definitely was asking if he could have a deal before he gave a statement, and I rebuffed it every time saying, no,
Okay.
you got to give us a statement first.
And what did you tell him in terms of what you knew about the case?
I don't recall all the details.
Well, do you remember some of them?
I can't remember exactly how I would have phrased it, but, you know, I forget how we started the interview to introduce what investigation we were talking about.
Well, the idea wasn't it, is if you testify against Luis, we'll work out something for you.
Well, from my recollection, we present it as, you know, you got to give your version of the events. That's what a prosecutor decides. But testifying in court is always going to be a likely thing that will have to occur. And some of that's just explaining the court system to somebody. People don't understand how that works. They think they can tell the cop once, and then I can go and just tell you guys what the witness told me, and I can't. So some of that's just explaining how the court's going to work.
Do you think it would be somewhat coercive if a person you were interviewing said that they were worried about their family being deported?
Who's the somebody?
Well, Isaac, in this case.
So he's saying that he's worried about it? Is it coercive?
Yeah, is it coercive to say, well, we know about you, your parents are undocumented, for example?
I mean, it's being transparent with the person you're talking to. You know, I'll mirror it that, you know, we speak to parents who might be losing their kids based on this criminal investigation, and we're not going to hide the fact that CYFD might be called, and this could affect their guardianship of the child, because that's the truth. It could. So things like that, just acknowledging truths, I think is okay. But I can tell you, on my part, I never contacted HSI about this family, immigration.
No, and I'm not suggesting that you did. I'm just wondering, as an interviewing tactic, if references to things that are vulnerable spots for a person who's being interviewed, like his parents or his sister, discussions like that took place in that interview, correct?
They did, and now that you remind me, but we also said, look, we think you're involved in this this murder, and yet we didn't show up with a SWAT team and kick in your parents' door and flip the couch upside down either, because we probably could have justified if we did that, but we didn't. We're choosing to encourage cooperation that we're seeking the truth from you here, which is why we just knocked on your parents' door. We waited 3 weeks for you to be comfortable. We actually gave him a lot of control in how we play out, because we wanted trust. We wanted credibility with him and his family.
Do you recall him asking for a lawyer?
I think he asked us if he should get a lawyer.
And what was your response to that?
No, I don't think you need one.
And didn't you say something to the effect of, I work in an office with a lot of lawyers?
And I did.
But you didn't tell them they were prosecutors.
I don't remember if I told them they were prosecutors, but I did work in an office with a lot of lawyers.
Okay. Well, anyway. And do you remember him asking you that he wanted to talk with a lawyer?
Again, I remember him asking, like, do I need a lawyer before I talk to you guys? And he asked me a question, I gave him an honest answer, and I said, no, I don't think you do.
Wouldn't it have been better to have a lawyer present, in your experience?
Objection, do we approach?
Yes.
Are many of these interviews conducted with a lawyer present?
On a murder investigation,
Yes.
I think most interviews with, like, key witnesses like this are not conducted with lawyers, but a higher number than other cases are, because they can get, real technical all of a sudden. So it's not unusual to have a lawyer present when interviewing a murder witness, but it's more common that it's not, because police find the witness first and we get to talk to them.
Okay. But ultimately, he was charged in this case.
Yes.
We're talking about Isaac.
Isaac Ramirez was charged.
So, do you know at what point he became a suspect
Of the other crimes?
in this case?
Well, so my understanding, he's not charged with the murder. He's charged with crimes that preceded the murder.
But he's charged in relation to this incident.
I guess it depends on how you phrase it.
Okay.
They were doing things that night. He was charged with some of the other things, but he wasn't charged with this murder, which sometimes happens.
Do you remember saying to Isaac to the effect that when he said, I feel like I have to talk to a lawyer, you said we could just charge you and the judge will give you a lawyer?
Yes, because that's true.
Okay.
If we charge someone, they get a lawyer on that.
Do you also remember saying you're making us rethink being so dang nice about trying to find you?
Yeah, I could have said that.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions I have.
Leader, Mr. Durant?
Yes, Judge. Morning, Kyle.
Good morning.
Want to call you Kyle? Can I call you Carl?
You can call me whatever you like.
I'm not going to call you Carl. How about Commander Hartsock? I do have a couple follow-ups for you. This was sort of a joint effort between you and Brian Acey. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, when you went in, like, did y'all have like a plan in place going into this, like how you were going to approach dealing with Mr. Ramirez?
I mean, Agent AC and I had talked, and Agent AC is a very experienced FBI investigator, and we'd worked other cases before. But in general, we had the same goal. We believed Isaac was in the car that night and witnessed it, and we wanted to gain his statement in cooperation with the investigation. That was it, but there was no more detailed planning than that.
Okay. And so going into this, I mean, you both sort of engage Mr. Ramirez at the dinner table in the apartment.
Yeah, we're actually in the living room.
In the living room, excuse me.
He's in a chair on a couch. There's a dining room table in the middle. I can actually remember it pretty vividly.
So it's pretty casual.
It's very casual.
And in reviewing the transcript, you know, it sounds as though sort of Mr. AC sort of started, if you can remember, he started the conversation, sort of broke the ice a little bit.
I believe so. We did a little bit more of the talking early on.
Okay. If he would have said something, you know, like completely out of left field, like let's slap the cuffs on, you know, and go hard in the paint right away, would that have been sort of something that maybe you would put the brakes on?
I would absolutely put the brakes on it. While the FBI was assisting and they helped us a lot and they're very skilled, this was a state investigation. And again, I was the quarterback now. I wouldn't have knowingly allowed anything that might have jeopardized one of my witnesses or evidence.
Okay. Because, yeah, you're running the show at this point, or at least about to.
Yes. Well, by that point, I'm the case agent. So we're in his living room. I don't really mind who does the first talking or the most talking, but we have the same goal. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be held accountable for the outcome. So I want to make sure everything is run as clean as possible.
Okay. And so were there any questions asked by Agent AC or by Nancy Stemo or even Mr. Iglesias that you were like, whoa, hold up?
No.
Okay. Would you say it was fair that you kind of either agreed with the question or sort of like thought, hey, that's a decent question along the way during the course of this interview?
Yeah, I think the statements that Brian AC made were on point to the level of the type of interview we were doing, and I thought Mr. Ramirez's questions were also very fair. He had his own concerns about it, but again, if someone asks me a question, I'm going to give them an honest answer. I think a witness or a suspect or a victim, they all deserve honesty from law enforcement, and if they ask how the process works, I'm going to explain it to them.
Okay, so in light of that answer, and in light of the question that you were asked on cross-examination about sort of your approach and you know what was said to Mr. Ramirez at the inception of this interview, when Brian AC said, you know, we don't care what your immigration status is, we don't care what your parents' immigration status is, we're not the immigration police, and he replies, yeah. Is that one of those questions where you're like, all right, I'm fine with that?
Yeah, again, I thought it was fine. Some of it's rapport building, where I just getting to know us, and that's a little bit of what's going on.
And so then, along those same lines, when he says, we're just trying to solve the woman that was killed who had 9 grandchildren and 2 kids, your thought on that was?
It was the truth. We were trying to solve a case of a woman who had 9 grandchildren and 2 kids.
With regard to one of the first questions that you were asked on cross-examination as far as identification, would it surprise you to know, or do you remember Brian AC actually saying, this is Kyle with the district attorney's office prosecuting the case?
I would be surprised to hear that, yeah.
Okay. If I were to show you a copy of the transcript, would that change your mind at all?
Oh, yeah, if the transcript is accurate.
All right. So going to page 2, line 13 on the 9th. Let me just show you. Okay. May I approach?
No.
Okay.
Do you remember how that introduction went?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like right at the door, right inside the living room as we first walk in.
Okay, so you're introduced at that point as,
Is working with, that says who's prosecutes cases or prosecuting cases?
right, but this is Kyle with the district attorney's office prosecuting cases.
Right.
Okay. Now, there was a line of questioning on cross-examination about your review of the Barranca interview and what, if any, involvement he actually may have had. In review of this, did you or anyone else that you were working with at this point, including AC or anybody that you may have had a discussion with, ever think that Barranca was the shooter?
No.
No? Why not?
Just the way that the case evolved with the car being kind of like turned into us by his sister, the other information we were getting in the Facebook pages, everything looked and appeared to be that Luis Talamantes was the driver of this crime. He was the one really pushing
Not
it forward.
like the driver, but like the quarterback.
Both. Literally the driver and also like he was running the show. And so the investigation did lean on that assumption, absolutely. Because you have to lean on some theory of the case as a detective. You have to. You can't just be a robot. You have to look up some theory and does my evidence support that theory or does it not?
So
That's
does
a constant act.
clarify that for the jury. Just having a theory, though, does that mean you're putting blinders on and going laser focused on somebody?
A good detective doesn't put blinders on, but you have to have a theory. You have to have something to go off. You can't just shoulder shrug and wander around in the dark and hope that you catch a bad guy. But you have to be very sensitive to what the evidence is telling you and what it's not telling you. You know, there's such a thing as negative evidence. The absence of something can prove something else. So that's what I helped to really recenter on the investigation and let the evidence lead us to where it was going to go. And that's why Zachary was just, in my mind, excluded.
Right.
That was just a red herring. That was a bad trail. Let's repick that trail up in the beginning. We start over fresh, and we got Isaac Ramirez.
So getting to Isaac, I mean, ultimately, what was it that you were trying to get out of him in those two interviews?
Oh, well, a credible, truthful statement from a person who witnessed a murder. Just that easy. That's it. I don't care if they were in the car. I don't care if it was a neighbor across the street. I don't care if it was what they are. An eyeball witness to a murder is a very, very important piece of evidence in the case. And I felt it was him, and we wanted to get the truth out of him.
Can I have a moment?
You may.
You were asked on cross-examination also about sort of just a clarification of the sequence of events. Can you sort of clarify for the jury just sort of the major points in the sequence of events during the investigation, like sort of the highlights sequentially?
The timeline?
Yeah.
November 19th is the murder. 8 days later, after the car is published to the media, police recover the car. A casing found just outside the driver's door of the car in the yard will match, or presumably the time match the casing found in the garage where the murder took place. That's a really big piece of evidence.
Judge, could you approach?
You may.
Left off.
The car was found, the casing was found by the car, matches the one in the garage. Luis Talamantes, sometime in December, is identified as the possible person of interest or suspect in the case. It's found that he's possibly in the San Antonio, Texas area. Police in San Antonio are able to contact him on a different incident. So now we know where he is. A second person, based on Another witness that came forward was believed to be in the car with Mr. Talamantes. Police initially believed that Zachary Blanca, and in late January, February, ended up finding him conducting a 2-hour interview. And what she eventually says, he was in the car, but his head was down, he wasn't really paying attention. And at that point, the investigation somewhat just stalls out when that doesn't seem to add in. By the time March and April come around, and we're looking at Zachary's phone and his phone records, and that's where I'm getting more involved. I don't think he's related at all, which is why I asked him to listen to his interview, because that's going to help me look at his phone, if I can hear his interview to see what he says. When I listen to the interview, I draw really grave concerns that this was not a truthful statement, that he's just agreeing to end the interview. At that point, I share my concerns with the detectives and the prosecution team that we might be going down the wrong direction. By the time June and July comes around, it's somewhat clear that the APD part of the case is just stalled out, and so it is switched over to my unit, and I become the case agent on it. The FBI also agrees to help, and kind of jointly together, we start tackling all the open leads, which included identifying the person in the car, interviewing him, that's Isaac Ramirez, and now corroborating other evidence he gave to piece this entire thing together, which included speaking to Carla Aguirre and other possible witnesses that were in and around Mr. Talamantes around the time of the crime. Until eventually we charged Mr. Talamantes after Mr. Ramirez agrees to a plea deal with the prosecutors to agree to testify.
All right. I don't have any further questions, Judge. Thank you.
And Mr. Durand, is there any reason why the other parts may not be released from testifying in this case, understanding he's technically the case agent?
He is the case agent, Judge, and I would reserve him.
And so at this time, you're free to leave the stand, keep in contact with the DAs to figure out when you're released from your subpoena.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Jury.
All right, and at this time, jury, I'm going to release you for the day. It's 10 o'clock. Please come back Monday afternoon at 1:30. We will actually be in a different courtroom at that time. We'll be on 338, which is on the 3rd floor. Turn right, we'll be at the very end of the hall. In the big ceremonial courtroom, I'll have signs up. I need just review the recess instruction for you again. Understanding you may have it memorized at this time. During recess, do not discuss this case with other jurors or with any other person, or allow anyone to discuss this case with you or in your presence. Avoid any publicity this case may receive. Do not read, listen to, or watch any news accounts of this trial. Do not express any opinion about the case or form any fixed opinion until the case is finally submitted to you for your decision. All rise for the jury. You may be seated. And do you all want to recess before discussing the phone calls?
I would prefer to just get this over with now.
Okay, defense?
I thought you just said you were, in terms of getting,
Yeah, we're
I just thought you just
discussing the
released
phone
them,
calls, and then we'll probably, I don't know if you want to discuss the phone calls first or any proffer about Detective Carter. It's up to you. I think that we can wait until the state has rested before giving that proffer, but it's
that's what I would prefer to do, Judge.
any objection to that state.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's 10 o'clock now. I think we have time to do it, first of all. Second of all, I would think that if Detective Carter is going to testify, or if the intention for Detective Carter is going to testify or not, that decision's already been made, since we're pretty much at almost the end of the trial. And so I would ask that we have time now between 10 and 12 to get that done, and let's get that squared away so that we know exactly what we're walking into, going into the conclusion of the case on Monday.
Okay. Could we approach, Judge, because there's some information I don't.
Sure. And I think we can start with, depends what's your objection as to the jail calls.
Well, Judge, even though most inmates should know phones are recorded, phone calls are recorded, I'm not sure that Mr. Talamantes understood that he would be recorded in those calls, and I would ask that they be not introduced into evidence in this case.
Response to that from the state?
That's actually what makes them even more reliable. And in terms of the reason we're getting into them, which is under 11-801, what was it? Hold on, let me find it.
These red books back here on the reference too.
Wait, what did I look for? Sorry.
Actually, I'm just going to use one source, so if you can cite it, because those ones aren't very recent. And do you have transcripts for that call?
Judge, we do, and we also have the recording with captions for each call. So because they're all in Spanish, we have the direct transcript, the Spanish version, but we also have certified transcripts, certified translated into English. And we have actually two different versions of that. They both actually line up. We have one that was given to us recently by the FBI, or the U.S. Attorney's Office, but we also did our own, which are the ones that I had sent the certificate to the court from the transcriber.
Okay, and we're going to actually take a brief recess, just about 10 minutes. We both need a break.
Okay.
Up here. So
All right.
I'll rise for the jury. We'll be right back. And Mr. Duran, if you can actually forward Michelle the transcripts for the call as well as the call. If you can just do a Googling, that's fine. We are on the record. We're on the record. Okay, I did receive the link from the state. How do you want to proceed with this, Dave? Do you want to introduce them all at this point? I can make my determination, or do you have sections that you're playing?
We have,
Yeah, sorry.
so I can just mark this as an exhibit.
Okay.
It has all 5 calls that we're seeking to enter.
And are you entering them in their entirety, or are you
They,
portions?
I think they're in the tour deck. Okay, just a minute, I'll tell you. So call 1 is redacted because there's a mention of Mexico, or the defendant mentions that he barely arrived from Mexico, and then they laughed about him not having a birth certificate. We redacted that. Call 2, make sure is not relevant. That's call 3. No, we're not doing call 3, right?
I think you're just doing 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Yes.
Or at least that's what I have.
Call 4 is the main call. That's actually the one with the defendant's voice. Call 5 is a brief talk. There's nothing redacted on that. Call 6 is not redacted. Call 7 is redacted. We redacted the first half of it, and why did we redact that one? Oh, it was a 3-way call, that's why. It was like he was using a card from somebody else in the jail, so it was a conversation that between 2 people that had nothing to do with this case.
Number 7?
Number 7?
Or this is number 6 that you're talking about?
No, this is number 7.
Okay.
Number 6 was not redacted.
And number 7 is he involved?
Say again?
Sorry, I didn't finish that sentence. Is he involved in number 7 because there's the indication that it's the kidnapping
No.
on the top?
That conversation is between Eric and Ricardo,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't believe we have Luis's voice on that call.
And State, are you getting in the transcripts or just the jail call?
We want it, and so again, the way we've done it is we took the transcripts that have been provided to the court, and we actually basically created a caption that follows the recording on video. So
Okay.
we have a video/audio recording that shows the English and Spanish captions as they're speaking. And that's what we would move to admit to the jury so that they can hear what's being said, tone of voice, whose voice, all that sort of thing, as well as captions that they can read along with since they're in Spanish. And the captions are both in Spanish and English. I think the Spanish is on top and the English is on the bottom.
Okay. Because in the call number 1, there's the participants, and it says AKA Luis Talamantes-Romero, AKA Julio, AKA El Loco. So I want to make sure that's not in the...
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
And do you want to play all of those now, or do you want me to look at this and make a ruling Monday?
How long are they? About an hour? Yeah. It's less than an hour for all the recordings, so I think we can probably go through them
Okay,
and maybe talk about them as they conclude one at a time and make a determination. That'd probably be.
that sounds fine. I just wanted to check. And Ms. Reinhardt, anything before the state starts cleaning up?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Sorry, Judge. Let me back up. Sorry, I grabbed the wrong one.
Hold on.
I missed the name. So if you click the name, another column.
What call?
For English, press
That's one.
So we're going to go in order. So this is call 1.
one. For a select, please enter your PIN number now. Please enter the area code and phone number you are calling now. Please hold. Please wait while your call is being connected. Please hold. Hello, this is a prepaid call from an inmate at the Bernalillo County Metropolitan Detention Center. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call, hang up or press your current balance is $9.69. This call is from a corrections facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using Global Tellink.
Bueno, ¿qué pasó, gordo? Ando acá. ¿Tienes teléfono que no sirve? Oye, ¿te diciendo fotos? No, sí te oigo, pero te oye bien quedito, gordo. Ándale. Ay, ahí te oigo ya. ¿Qué me haciendo? Nada, vengo de acá de por donde llega la mamá de Sabrina, gordo. ¿Qué me haciendo allá? ¿Te cogiendo algo o qué? Sí. Está bien. ¿Con quién andas? ¿Con Lupe? Con la Lupe, gordo. Está bien. Sí, el yo ya anda en la casa, ahorita me habló. Sí. Pero ya, no respondí nada, no le contesté, pero me estaba hablando, pensé que quería algo. A ver, Martín, ¿para poner? Lo pongo. Bueno. Espérate, gordo, porque quién sabe se colgó huyo. Deja ver si marca o si no va a marcarlo otra vez yo. ¿No qué más? ¿Se va a comer o qué? Oh, ni antes de comer, amigo, que ya no tengo de hacer. Ya acabo de cenar. ¿Ya acabaste de cenar? Ya. Pues de salida, ya ordenaste. ¿Va? Espérate, gordo, porque no hablo el pinche y lo quito. Espérame.
¿Pero qué aquí? Nada, quito con el negro, voy a tener una boquilla así. No le voy a cambiar la bobina, pero le voy a cambiar las boquillas al jeep, el aceite, el filtro, pues the basic, tú. Fíjate, no se me pague, no nos pagaron hasta me dio el 9, Panqui. Una Glass chiquitita 43, Glass 43. La rendí, la tranqué. Y de ahí pues voy a hacer esto una para el pinche chip, porque la madre de la parte de arriba, no la bujía, cuesta casi 200 bolas, güey. Pero después de las cuchillas, la forquen a los cables, el aceite, los cables, el aceite, el filtro, y así. ¿A quién? ¿Es de Revolución? ¿Pero es de Hito Los Lunas? Ya, yo conozco el Neni. ¿Qué se me dice? ¿Eso me tiene que comprender esta madre? Ah, entonces tú, ¿cómo lo? ¿Cómo lo? Este va, güey. Aquí tengo tu pladero, güey. No, productorón. Ah, pinche madre. Esta madre me arrancó pinche temperatura en la mano. ¡Vamos a la verga! Pinche perro, güey. Fastidioso, güey. No, por tiempo le estamos tomando un boche. Vamos, vete atrás. Panqui, ¿qué dice el pinche chicle? Esculillo, mejor. Esculillo, no te metes en broncas por él, nosotros te pedimos esculillo, güey. Y no tiene nuestra bronca que está fuera por él, güey.
Ahora me saca el negro.
¿Sacó el negro?
A ver qué tratas con el bebé y se junta con el mensaje.
Pues dice el puto, ¿quiere dejarlo o qué?
No quiso hablar con mensaje que antes se lo trabajo de teléfono. De que pues todo, güey, la verdad vamos a ver un pinche tiro para tapar en la escuela y no quiso hablarse pues yo.
Con culo, mijo. Esto no se puede, Panqui. Te voy a decir esto. Ah, pero porque nunca se te olvide, güey. Mijo, muchos güeyes, güey. Son bien vergas, mijo, güey. Pero 50 tienen ¿tienes miedo que le pongan una chinga, le tengan miedo a los putazos, güey? Tengo miedo a los putazos, mijo. Lo prefiere culiarse, güey. Pero van a empezar a poner muy fuertes y que las pinches largas divinas, güey.
Lo que le dije, güey, porque iba a conocer que no come, le dije, pobre, le dije, güey, de que están tratando en la pinche calle, güey, le dije, aquí estamos como hombres. No, güey, que no es mi creo, que no sé qué, le dije, están tocando, que le dos cejas, no sé qué, le dije, como quieras, güey, la verga, y no quiso y se fue.
Ah.
Sí, porque es uno de los del webcam.
Ya.
Se fue mejor el culo.
Abusón, mijo, abusón. Acá afuera tengo un verde con 3 cuartos, güey. Pero allá adentro no te lo agarras. Así me topé 8 veces que tal, pero esto está afuera, güey. Y dije, no quiero pedo, yo sí quiero, güey. Dije, yo sí quiero pedo, coso.
Le dije, no vale la pena, porque lo conozco de hace rato lo conocí antes que se metían esos pedos, se lo ve.
Pero, no es pedo de negro, es pedo de cabrino, mijo. Tú sabes que es pedo de cabrino.
Y luego dijo, no, le dije, como quieras, aquí está, la mandé en mi cara de hermano, le dije, güey, este güey me sabe que le va a llegar un pinche cabezazo.
Es lo que no saben, mucha gente no sabe.
Yo sé.
No saben que la cabeza te noquea la verga de seguro, güey. ¿Ves? O nada, tú no, pero qué, güey.
No, pues
El Juárez, Panchi, cuando estaba el otro, nos quiere 5 güeyes, güey, nomás de cabezazos, güey. Se me acercaban y ya, yo sé que tienen que retirar un poquito para pegarme. Y trata, era pura pinche narizota. Y ya, sangrando y me trabajó los regazos de sangre y sangre. Panchi, me lo ya me dijo que fue bueno y yo me fue, güey. Chingonzota, güey, full. ¿El policía qué pinche no es? ¿Eres de rojo no, Panchi? No, ya se fue. Me viene atrás de mí, la troca en la banana del pie. Y estoy hablando contigo y me tocó el vidrio, el puto y me paniqueó, güey. Pinche narizón, culero. No, se porta bien, Panchi, pinche narizón, güey.
No, pues aquí estaba yo. Solo me llevó el Cooper y me tiró un caso de esa madre.
¿Sí?
Sí.
Y ahorita le voy a poner chembus, güey, a las bocinas de la puerta.
Ya.
Le voy a poner unas chembus de las redonditas de frente en las puertas y six by nine atrás. Y mira, verga, ¿lista? Bien, ahorita es que coño con kilómetros, no que le traiga la rampa, güey, porque lo ves tú una persona de...
Ah, pues si nos está viendo. Mamá. Oye.
¡Lista! ¡Lista! Lo está viendo para que cuelga, güey. Si no es que puse ahí abajo. ¿Cómo son? Tú no te gustes, tú dices, le van a mamá, no, tú no te gustes, padre. Ahí le estás esperando, güey. No, pero porque yo sé cómo está el pedo, pero te digo. No sé si te agüites, ¿por qué? Porque de repente pegan, yo sé cómo está algo, de repente pegan. Pues sí, pero tú no te agüites. Al rato vamos a salir, güey. Ese lo mandé en bici para tiempo, güey, tú no te agüites, güey. ¿Qué me dices? No, es que yo le compré una feria, güey. Y yo le compré una feria para... Moreno ahí, hacer un cambio, güey.
¿Qué te va a llevar el premio?
Ahora, que pues yo me lo estoy dando, ¿no?
Any objections as to that one?
Maybe I missed it, Judge, but I'm not sure what relevance it has to the case.
I think,
So,
if you want to stay seated, I think it's probably, the audio is probably picked up better by the court monitor. Stay seated.
yeah, just need to grab the microphone. Judge, the relevance on this one, first of all, is that the defendant is on, let me see. So this one was from, first of all, the date on this, and this will be established by Eddie Iglesias, this is the July 23rd one, right?
It said November 12th, but
What's that? Right, call number one, but November, excuse me. There's discussions of the Jeep in that call by the defendant. So that shows that similar to some of the other exhibits that we have showing him driving the Jeep, this goes to show his ownership, control, maintenance. I think we heard statements about needing parts and fixing the vehicle. So that's our primary use of that particular one.
Judge, there's no way to identify if it's the same Jeep. I mean,
That goes to weight, not admissibility.
well, it's just, I think it's quite prejudicial in terms of if it doesn't identify, I mean, the Jeep, if, you know, in this case, the story is that they went, you know, through some parking lots and found another Jeep. I mean, you know, with
similar Jeep to get the wheel, there's probably thousands of these vehicles out there with basically the same characteristics. They could have 3, 4, 5 Jeeps. I don't know, but you don't know from this, and therefore it's prejudicial and irrelevant if they can't tie it to this particular Jeep in this case.
And state, I find that it's relevant, but I would ask that you keep it limited. I think that you can get some of the beginning portions out. I think that the part of them trying to find 40 is a little bit more prejudicial than probative, but I think the discussion of getting the, I think he gets the Jeep at least says. I know there was some discussion about going to her house with the Jeep, something like that. But I find that portion, if it's used, I find if you're using it to show proof of ownership, or at least that he was driving it and maintaining it, I can see that that would be relevant. But I think the part about him fighting and maybe talking about Eric's case is more prejudicial than probative and not relevant. But the parts about the Jeep and maybe even just the initial play that this was a phone call, well, the phone call from MDC indicating that Eric is the one making the phone call. I think that's fine.
Okay, so do you want us to essentially redact it back after the conversations about the Jeep and then stop it from there?
Yeah, I think that would probably be best. Any other objections to the state on that? Okay, defense? Okay, in defense, any further objection on number 1 or any objection, I guess substantive objection to keeping in the parts about the Jeep, but keeping out the parts about hitting the 40 and the fights?
I didn't hear the last part you said.
Any substantive objection to keeping out the discussion about hitting the 40 and the fights?
Just a moment, if you can give me a moment. We agree with that, Judge.
Okay. The state, next one.
Next call, Judge, is call number 4. Please, this out. So is ascending in order?
Please enter the area code and phone number. Please hold. Please wait while your call is being connected. Please hold. Hello, this is a prepaid call from an inmate at the Bernalillo County Metropolitan Detention Center. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call, hang up. Your current balance is $9.28. This call is from a correction facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Bueno. Nada.
¿Dónde está?
¿Eh?
¿Dónde anda?
Pues tuve que salir de volar. Pues no le puedo decir mucho.
Sí. ¿Todo bien o qué?
Pues no, pero
Sí.
ya te has de imaginar. 25 on 6. Mira, ya te has de imaginar.
¿Por qué?
Oye,
Sí. Se tiene que salir de aquí.
sí.
Ay, mamá.
Mira, si te fijas bien, por atención que te diré.
Sí.
¿Te acuerdas cuando ahí donde avientan todas, así como andaban haciéndole con el Omar?
Sí.
Aquí.
Sí. No, tiene que poner el teléfono.
¿Ya ves que tiene pantalla?
No me hagas más.
Sí.
¿No más?
¿No me oyes?
Sí, ahora sí.
¿Ya ves que acuerdas de Omar?
Sí.
Las pantallas así que hay.
Sí.
Pues nomás, fíjate.
Pues ahorita vi algo así, por eso la estoy hablando.
Sí.
Deshacerse de esa camioneta.
¿Eh?
Entonces deshacerse de la camioneta esa.
No entiendo bien.
De la troca cabeza esa.
Sí.
Necesitan esconderla.
Ya está.
Necesitan deshacerla, esconderla, que no hayan salido nada, porque ahorita ya mira algo así, que no se puede mucho.
Pues sí, ya como quiera, ya ojalá mañana ya todo esté bien. Ojalá que ya mañana todo vuelva a la normalidad.
Ay, madre, usted que no entiende, está viendo que me tengo hasta la verga.
Pues sí.
Que regañarlo ya en la verga y la toma.
Pues sí.
Vámonos. ¿Y dónde está este loco?
Aquí.
¿Y qué hace? ¿Un pleito o qué?
No, pues no queremos platicar mucho, pero no sé.
Ay, madre. Pues va a salir lejos el pata de cosa aquí o qué?
Sí.
¿Con quién se jugó?
¿Con yo?
Pero nadie más andaba ahí en el casino.
Sí.
¿Quién?
El tontino que era amigo tuyo.
¿Y ese tontino está?
Pues ahí te estuvo, que ahí sí iba a estar.
No sé si se pueden llevar ese tontino, no, porque ese güey ahí me pincha la pata. No se sabe bien.
De esa amiga bastante. Sí, pero no quiso, dijo que no.
¿Cómo si no es dinero de verga?
Sí, nomás que tuve que mover al loco.
¿Ah?
Yo nomás que tuve que mover al loco.
Bueno, pues sí, mamá, pero pues si este sabe claramente, se lo puede llevar a la verga. ¿Dónde está Boogie?
No sé, ya, pero es que no hablo mucho.
Yo sé, pero él está hablando con ese güey para decirle que no anda la pinche psicóloga.
Esperen, checa. ¿Su lugar viene de cabeza de ella?
Sí, nomás están buscando la descripción.
No, entonces todo está bien. Todo está bien.
También.
Sí, pues ya. No, ya no, yo sé. Porque yo nomás con que no tenga numeración de cabeza de ella, todo está bien, ese se lo voy a desaparecer. Ahorita nomás lo primero que me urge es desaparecer al loco, porque yo sé que pinche cabeza de ella no se va a tentar el alma.
Tranquila, yo sé, cuando usted no se puede hacer de cabeza, pues nadie me molesta, yo la necesito ahorita mucho. No hay que tener esos pinches planes, ama.
¿Por qué?
No venga con esos planes ni pensamientos.
Pues no.
Yo no puedo tener usted que estoy la única que me está dando ahorita. Ahora, usted también me dice que cuando quítele esa pinche placa porque ya conozco a este pinche loco.
No, pues ahorita ya como quiera todo está bien, el otro ahorita el paúl que va a hacer de él ahorita, por mientras guardarse, y ya.
Son los esos que te salieron de tu bote, no están en el carro, ¿no?
No, ya nada.
Ok, se limpian todo, el pinche carro adentro, bien, que no vaya a haber nada de porra, de esa madre.
Sí.
Ahora, ¿y cuándo fueron para el casino? ¿Cuándo pasó eso en el casino?
Ahora, 6, 5. Sí.
Ahora, dígale a Carlos que no está hablando mucho por el teléfono, madre. Dígale que Carlos no está hablando tanto por los teléfonos. Tienes que regañarme y ponerme las pilas. Yo necesito contactar a aquel güey para que no vaya a andar diciendo la gente, porque ese ya sabe cómo está el pedo. ¿No es una güey? ¿Qué rollo? No, pues nomás. Se le dan la constitución, pues les digo que yo lo necesito mucho yo. Pues sí, pues lo que pasó, ni pedo, pero pues me fuera llevado a aquel güey, porque aquel güey trae una pinche bocota.
Pero no tenía que pasar, ¿no? No tenía que pasar, pues.
Era bien condición.
No. Nada bien, entonces.
Porque ahorita miré en la pantalla, nomás andan buscando un descripción. Nomás necesitan, pues tú sabes pues Julio, tú sabes más que yo, tú ya sabes todo, nomás te necesitaba que hablaras bien con aquel güey, con el patacros, que no voy a andar de pinche figón.
Ahora tú vas a la por atrás, no quieres que aprenda nada, perfecto, cosa.
Nomás que estaban los dos, ¿o qué?
Sí, bueno.
No, tú no estás ni que se tú estás bien, yo aquí miré Me compré todo está bien, no hay nada, nomás andan. Sorry, ya sabes. Nomás necesito que andes al 100, ya quiero ganar los temas. Y déjale ganas, pues. Prefiero de que lloren en su casa, de que lloren en la mía. Mamá para nadie se les ocurre, ¿no? Nadie.
No sé.
Era un cabello negro, ¿no?
Sí.
Ya. No, tú nomás esa no soy un tal tiro, nomás necesito que andes al 100, no andes tomando llave, necesito que andes al 100.
Estuvo.
De todos modos, con el favor de Dios, me dejen salir tarde que temprano, pero no, tú no te agüites.
Sí, ya es mucho estado. Pero es más atrás, ¿no?
Ya. Aunque no hayan tenido marcas esa madre, ¿no?
Sí, no, sí termino. Sí termino.
Ay. Bonito, nomás que andes al tiro, no te me agüites tú, échale ganas.
Sí, pues ya que pasé, ya está hecho, ya ni nada, pues,
No, todo chido, nomás, tú no te agüites. Necesito conocer muchas ganas, todo va a estar chido con el favor desde arriba. No te me agüites, échale ganas, ¿no? Te quiero mucho, échale ganas, yo. No te me agüites, así como tú me enseñaste siempre que no me agüitara, que me haga ahorita que tú hagas. No te me agüites, reina, como siempre me has dicho. Nomás me dan un eso con su escándalo porque tú sabes.
No, de verdad.
Y nomás de repente, ¿qué tal?
No sé. La cara, tú. La cara.
Échale ganas, no te agüites, no me estoy así, yo sé que estás hablando y todo, pero si quieres ver lo que va a pasar, y yo saliendo y hacer, y yo voy a estar allá, date la vuelta y todo va a estar con el favor de Dios, todo va a estar chido.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Hay que marco para estar haciendo unos 15 minutos, suyo. Entonces tú dices, te quiero mucho y no te tiro. Sé que te quiero mucho. Bueno, bye.
Thank you for using Global Link.
Okay, defense, any substantive objection on this one?
Well, Judge, it's just unclear to me on this conversation, most of it between Baron and I do have an objection because I'm not clear they're talking about whatever happened in this case. It's not clear to me.
there's a lot of talk back and forth, and then it's involving other people's activities. So we do object to that because I don't think it's clear that it pertains to what Julio and my client may have done or not done in this case, therefore irrelevant.
So we can kind of break this call down into two different parts, Judge. The part before the defendant comes on the phone and the part after he comes on the phone. The part that we have before that, I think actually does come in squarely under 11801. D2E was made by the parties co-conspirator during and in the furtherance of the conspiracy, because I think, first of all, we look at the date and time that the call was made, which was on 11/19/19, which is what Agent Iglesias will testify to. And I believe it was in the late afternoon or evening that the call was made. We hear who will be identified as Elizabeth Talamantes speaking with Eric Baron, who is in jail, and they're talking about one moving. I think when they keep referring to the fool, it's the inference is, at least at this point, given the timing of it and the subject matter and the proximity of events, and what we've already known through other testimony, that they're essentially either planning to or in the process of actively moving the defendant out of state. We also have, there's another statement in there, let me find it.
The first portion with Lisa, or the second portion with Lisa?
I'm still talking about just the first portion before the defendant gets on. So we're offering that essentially as a statement of conspiracy, which has an issue of reliability because essentially they think they're talking in private, and they're making these statements. The individuals don't have to be charged in order to be a part of the conspiracy. They just have to have evidence of that, and I think we do very clearly. Any argument as to confusing or what this is actually about goes to weight, not admissibility. And again, I think part of that weight, even just to establish a bare minimum relevance, is the timing of the call, the parties involved in the call, and the subject matter of the call. Going to the second half, I don't know if you want to make a ruling on the first half of the call or if you want to just argue the whole call right now.
Anything further on the first part, Ms. Reinhardt?
Well, Judge, it could be, with these particular players, it could be other matters. I don't think it's clear that it pertains to this matter. I understand the date and time issue, but I think it's too tenuous to link it necessarily to what happened in this case.
I don't think it's tenuous. I mean, I do think based on the date, but I think it's more prejudicial considering that Lisa isn't testifying unless you're planning on calling her. So the first portion I don't find relevant, and I find it more confusing for the jury, but for the second part, I do think that's more relevant. That's his statements indicating, trying to think of how to say this without swearing, basically admitting that he was involved in this. And so the second portion I think is certainly admissible. The first portion I do have some hesitations, and so if you can edit the second portion when Lisa gets off the call.
Okay, so we're only going to be allowed to play the portion when the defendant gets on the line?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, can I get clarification from Your Honor? Because
Sure.
Elizabeth is not going to be testifying. She's in federal custody somewhere in the United States. I don't know where she's at. But nonetheless, unavailability is not an issue under 801. It's only an issue under 804.
Mm-hmm.
With regard to 801, we do feel like, I mean, if the court's ruling is relevance, I think, again, this portion goes to weight, not admissibility. I think the timing of it, the fact that they're discussing, and especially in context of once the defendant gets on the phone during the same call, it lends its relevance directly that way, because It's essentially two people talking about what's going to happen with the defendant and with what had happened. And then he gets on the phone and then they further discuss what actually did happen with the crime itself. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is that Eric's making the call because of what was shown on the news and the Jeep.
I think that it's confusing a jury because Eric's also not expected to testify, right?
No.
And so I think that's where it gets to be confusing, is that you can say that's what he's talking about, but I think certainly when Luis is making those statements, they're testimony of the party opponent, and I think that it's clear what he's talking about based on the time frame, based on his emotions. I don't think it's quite as clear with Eric. I mean, I think that...
And just one more thing, Judge. Eric does tell Liz to get rid of the car in the first half of that conversation, and I think it's non-hearsay because it goes to the 801 rule, which is things that are not hearsay. It's not confusing. It's a directive pursuant to State versus Tony, 131 New Mexico 558, 2002. He's just telling her to do something that she has knowledge of at that point that is essentially furthering a tampering or a conspiracy to tamper.
This is a conversation between two other people, and we, it's just, it is confusing. I don't think that it's, I don't think it's clear what is being discussed, in my opinion, and I think it will be confusing to them because it doesn't even involve Luis and its statements of his sister, who certainly is findable and could be brought down here, and it's really a question of confrontation too, with respect to these statements.
How does it not have to do with confrontation?
What's that?
How do you get over the confrontation?
This isn't a statement for purposes of test. It's not testimonial. Confrontation only applies if the statements are testimonial in nature. So we would have a confrontation issue if these statements were made to somebody who is in law enforcement, where they're actually taking something. In this case, confrontation doesn't apply because we have civilian people talking to other civilian people with an indicia of reliability. So confrontation is not what's at play here. It's just simply admissibility by hearsay or not.
But the confrontation isn't just about law enforcement. The confrontation clause says you have a right to confront anybody who's going to testify against you. The statements from Lisa and Eric between each other are certainly subject to the confrontation clause because they're not brought to testify against Luis.
But the confrontation analysis only kicks in. The court needs to first make a finding that these statements are testimonial. There's certain statements that we have well-established precedent that are either testimonial or not. Statements from one civilian to another, and there's case law on this, say those are not testimonial statements, and so we can't even get into a confrontation analysis because it needs to be established first and foremost that they are testimonial. So I don't believe this court can make that finding because this is just jail call. These are what they believe at this point to be not a confidential call because obviously it's being recorded and it was announced that it was recorded, but certainly nothing that would be considered privy by any sort of law enforcement. Like the intention of making the statement is not for law enforcement. It's not to law enforcement. Let me give you a little precedent, Judge. This is State v. Smalls from the 10th Circuit, 605 F3D 765.
When was it?
2010.
Okay.
In its attempt to distinguish testimonial and non-testimonial statements, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals defined testimonial as a formal declaration made by a declarant that, when objectively considered, indicates that the primary purpose for which the declaration was made was that of establishing or proving some potentially relevant to a criminal prosecution. These people are not talking for purposes of any sort of criminal prosecution. To the contrary, they're actually talking about statements in order to evade prosecution, which gives it that indicia of reliability and takes it out of that whole confrontation discussion.
But you're prosecuting Mr. Talamantes on conspiracy and tampering.
Right, but they don't
And
know
so-
that.
Well, I mean, sure, it doesn't just, the confrontation clause doesn't just kick into law enforcement or statements made to law enforcement. It's certainly for something like this, where, and I think for purposes of this, where you have two individuals that are testifying, the state is bringing in those statements, but Mr. Talamantes doesn't have the right to confront them because they're not being brought to trial. They were brought both on the initial witness list. The state could have brought them to trial. They're not. I'm not finding that that the entire first part is subject to the confrontation clause, but particularly some of, or that they're testimonial, but I think that certainly some of Lisa's statements are. I'll let you brief that over the weekend, and we can come back on Monday with some of this. But I do find that particularly the sections involving Lisa talking to Eric are subject to confrontation.
Okay, yeah, that's fine, Judge. I'm
Okay.
confident in the case law that we have.
Okay, cool. And same thing with you, Ms. Reinhardt, if you want to brief on how they are subject to confrontation, that would be appreciated. Okay, next call.
So the second half is admissible, just to be clear?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's clear that he's, that Eric is talking to him about seeing the Jeep on TV.
Okay.
For English, for a collect call, please enter your PIN number. Please enter the area code and phone number you are calling now.
Which call is this?
3?
Is 3 or is this 5?
5, sorry.
Please hold. Please wait while your call is being connected. Please hold. Hello, this is a prepaid call from an inmate at the Bernalillo County Metropolitan Detention Center. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call, your current balance is $8.54. This call is from a corrections facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using Global Tellink.
Bueno. Hey,
Espérame.
¿qué pasa? Santi,
Hey,
¿qué
¿qué haces, mamá?
nada, Ricardo?
No. Ahí está, ahí, mamá. Está bien. Vamos para allá, para...
¿Qué?
Vamos para allá, ¿dónde alcanzó?
Más o menos sí.
¿Y el Robbie qué andaba haciendo, mamá? La línea no me contestó.
No lo debe oído, pero ahí está en la casa, más tarde me trae ahí, ¿verdad?
Sí, mamá.
Y apenas salió con él.
Después me amaneció con cuidado, y más ahorita.
Ok.
Thank you for using Global Tellink.
Yeah, so Judge, we think the relevance of this call is that this essentially is happening real time between Elizabeth Talamantes and Eric Baron, in which she's at that point driving the defendant down. So this is, we're offering this in furtherance of the conspiracy under 801 D2E.
Okay, and that's? Go ahead.
Judge, as I understand it, this is a conversation from It's November 19. I just don't see why the conversation between, is it Eric Barone and Zamora, it really, it's just so unclear whether it has anything to do with Luis.
And I'll
He
reserve.
never went to Juarez, so, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what this does to help us understand any issue in this case. So I think it's irrelevant.
Go ahead, Mr. Dre.
So, first and foremost, on cross-examination of Carla Aguirre, I believe defense counsel is the one who actually brought up the idea that that ultimately the intention was to get the defendant to Juarez in a circuitous way so as to avoid law enforcement. And so even though they never made it, that doesn't mean that wasn't the intention. And again, because we're talking about essentially two individuals who are essentially having a conversation in real time about a furtherance of a conspiracy, we believe it's admissible. Again, unavailability is not subject to this portion of the rule because we're under non-hearsay, and confrontation doesn't apply because these statements are not made in contemplation of testimony later. These are essentially a group of people who are working in an effort to try to hide a gun, a jeep, and a person by getting all three of those things away, as far away from a crime scene as possible. And so it's actually the opposite of any sort of confrontation conclusion or analysis. It's in fact calls that are made with the idea that they're done in secret and discussing in real time what they're doing.
But Judge, it appears that it's a call, you know, it's a call obviously between Barone and his mom. It's referring to a person, someone named Rolly. She's apparently driving to Juarez, telling her to be careful. So what is this, how is this connecting to this case? I don't see it.
I'm going to reserve ruling on this one because I want to listen to Carla's testimony, especially on cross, because I think that this may go counter to my order in limine as far as discussing going to Juarez, because the way that I understood her testimony was just that they were getting him out of here. You know, and there was the cousin in San Antonio. So that's why I want to listen to it, because I think that, I mean, I understand the fleeing argument from the state, but I just want to make sure that it doesn't run counter to what I had ordered in my, on the motions in limine, particularly as far as the going to Mexico, because I think this almost sounds more prejudicial, like he's going there because there's family there, versus that he's leaving to go to Mexico like we had talked about before.
Okay, and just for the record, Judge, I think that goes to weight, not admissibility. Secondly, it goes, the defense opened the door on cross-examination with Carla Aguirre talking about Mexico. Thirdly, if my memory served, I thought the court allowed us to talk because essentially it's common knowledge, or it's not exclusive to anybody who may be native to Mexico.
It's
flee to
common
Mexico.
practice.
What's that?
It's common practice, not common knowledge.
That's what I meant to say, sorry. Common practice to flee to Mexico if in fact somebody has allegedly committed a crime. Canada, Caribbean, Cuba, wherever you want, get out of the country. And I believe the court's ruling was that it wouldn't necessarily be more prejudicial than probative to show that they were fleeing to Mexico. We're not in any way trying to impugn the defendant with any sort of immigration status. We're purely focused on showing consciousness of guilt through flight, which is really our overarching argument here, and furtherance of a conspiracy through admissions, and essentially, you know, evidence to show that this is our individual who committed these crimes by showing this sort of circumstantial evidence going towards his guilt. And so for all these reasons, I do believe it is admissible. I do understand the court's reserving ruling. We may include this as a portion as part of our brief.
So that's fine. Go ahead.
Just a quick response. I mean, there is no evidence that he fled to Mexico.
Well, I think that's what I want to listen to as far as the the cross-examination from Carla as where they were intending to go and whether they were going to stop in San Antonio, and whether there's any knowledge of where Luis was going to go from there. Because I understand the argument, but I also think that the statement of, in just one moment, I'm trying to find one statement, toward over there to Juarez or what, I think that indicates it would be incredibly circuitous to go from here to San Antonio to Juarez. Which, I mean, I can understand that, but I think that I'm just going to listen to Carla's statements.
I would ask that the court listen to Isaac's testimony as well, because during the portion of his testimony, the question was asked, did you ever see Luis after that? And he said that he was leaving town and he was going to Mexico. He told me to go with him, but I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be a coward because I didn't do anything. I think that was that line of questioning from Luis, or from Isaac about Luis came into play as well.
But Judge, that's just what's in his head. It doesn't mean,
No, that's what he told him.
Well, so say.
Yeah, this one, it's particularly on a statement toward over there to Juarez or what?
If my client wanted to really go to Mexico, it would have been a short drive. It says no, it's San Antonio too. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's what the state's getting at, is that he wasn't just going to go from here to Juarez. It was going to be a longer way for like the consciousness of guilt to try and not be.
But why would you do that?
That's certainly a question.
When you can jump on I-25 and be there in 3 hours.
Because there's border patrols all along the way.
Well, there's border patrols everywhere.
I'm not making any determination on that. We're not here for that. But I'll reserve ruling and I'll listen to the testimony over the weekend or on Monday morning. Okay. And next one? Again for number 6.
Yes.
For a collect call, please enter your PIN number now.
Which call is this?
6.
Please enter the area code. Please hold. Please wait while your call is being connected. Please hold. Hello, this is a prepaid call from an inmate at the Bernalillo County Metropolitan Detention Center. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call, your current balance is $16.08. This call is from a correction facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using Global Tel-Link.
Hey, no te sabe nomás. Aquí chévere,
¿Quién está ahí?
mayor, los niños y Messi, el Pablo.
Está bien.
¿Sí tú?
Ah, qué chido.
Ah, ay no. Está bien, sí.
Sí, no.
Que no está bien porque no van a comer nada.
Sí, no.
Policía te dijo no.
Sí, bueno.
Sí, pero que ya no es lo que le dijo Nocho antes que pues ahora todo.
También hablé, güey, también en la dieta, me come el pinche sal y que tú vete a tu casa, güey, tirar la vida ni nada.
Lo que le decía también, que no le llegaba la corriente. Pues, a ver qué rollo, vamos a formar lo que está en la casa todo. Chingo de, tengo 2 12 de aquí de cisterna, un chingo de herramienta, un par de rines.
¿Qué son los años de los 24?
Con sí.
Esas dosis del sistema. ¿Qué dosis son?
No sé, déjame ver.
Esas llévatelas y échalas adentro de la troca, güey.
¿De la
Mira,
ropa?
sí.
Sí.
Los rines también los puedes poner en la caja. No, es que la caja está bien tumbada esa troca. Pero esas dosis, ¿qué son las tickets?
Yo digo que sí.
¿Cuánto fueron unos juguetes?
No, se no todo eso de aquí los juguetes.
¿Qué más se puso?
Pues yo no ni por esto, y los juguetes dijo que se afanó los juguetes, pero nomás la herramienta y eso es lo que te dije.
¿La herramienta?
Sí, pero
¿La herramienta
pues unas mesas sé que tenían unas llantitas que puedes mover.
¿Un generador y eso?
¿Un generador? No, nada, nomás el power wash o eso.
¿Qué tanto te quieren los apagar?
Pues el power wash yo creo que me dan dinero y me dan una herramienta también, nomás de que darle reines y el sistema y eso. Y otra herramienta que tenía él.
Los rines son los que tenía en la camioneta.
No sé, pero no sé qué. Yo diría que sí, Panchi.
¿Son los
Sí, sí
mismos
son.
los que traen
Sí, sí son.
tu carro?
Sí, esos son.
¿Cuánto quiero por ellos?
No sé, algo que se formara a todos que nos quedamos en la feria. Pero acá... No, le quedó desafanarlo, pues que ya tengo un desmarino que me lleva también para allá a la casa de Lexio, no quiero llevar todo para allá. No tengo que ayer me llevó una pinche telesota y luego el otro día eso y luego otras cosas.
¿Cuál telesota te llevaste, la tuya o otra?
Otra, me trajo otra y me la dio el güey también. Y eso me lo regañé en la noche, güey, cuando me llevó la tele.
Bonito que cuides una de esas teles, güey, yo sí. La que era tuya, ¿qué vas a hacer con ella? Que me la vendas. La que te ha quebrado, que la tengas.
Pues aquí está, aquí no están, no vamos a vender ni nada las teles, ¿sabes que eso no se vende? Pues la tele tiene una grandezota también.
Pero los rines estaban puestos en camioneta con el pasaporte.
No, tenía los originales, pero no sé qué güey, tanto. No me decía bien mucho güey. No, es que ya saben que era un pinche esa madre y el color.
Yo lo miré ahorita, por eso me di cuenta todo. Miré eso y ya que no. Y fue cuando marqué y no, sí.
Sí, güey, no sé qué rollo, güey. Pues era, a ver, el güey lo reunió anoche, que se viniera a la pinche casa, que se durmiera. Y le di nota y todo, y así que yo que lo tiraba al león, que le usaba la cosa también él. Y ya ves.
Te digo, por los pinches problemas. Ahora hablé con mi mamá y dijo, usted no se puede usar de cabeza por nadie nomás. Por tanto que lo quiere todo, usted no va a estar muerto por nadie en la verga. Ya sabes cómo es mi mamá tan mentira. Sí, yo, mi pinche pelada, que están nosotros. Nosotros vamos a hacer por pendejadas de alguien más.
Lo que le dije, yo sé que pues está acabando, ¿no? Pero ya pasó lo que pasó, y que pues yo le decía todos los días lo decía, todos los días. Y le daba mota para que se durmiera, le daba gratis.
Sí, no, todas pinches pendejadas con esa boca, esa pinche mamá, se fueran quedado bien pinche padres en la verga, güey.
No sé, güey, pues... No sé si andaba en avión o qué rollo,
Sí,
güey.
tú sabes que sí, güey, se están en su pinche avión.
Y le dije que me van a regalar lo que no, ¿cómo no, yo? ¿Cómo? no, güey, si es que conozco, le dije. Y ya, pero, ya ves. Y luego hallaron una llanta.
¿Qué?
Pues eso, güey, porque cuantificó una, el oso robó de otra, güey, y luego después hay una pinche calle tirada. Y pues aquí tenía todo el otro güey, las pinches manos que tocaron y la llanta.
No, creo que están bien pendejos a la verga, güey.
Tiraron a esa madre allí y la hallaron, y pues la usaban para güey ese.
Tampoco sí tiraron el pinche... También pendejos a la verga, güey.
Tiraron una, güey, y la hallaron.
A la verga, una pinche carretera.
Sí, güey, pues el pinche ya sí, ya. Sí, luego ¿y te lo pego, Pancho, o qué?
Sí, güey. No, güey, no sé qué opinar, güey, no podemos ver todo, güey.
Yo sé, no, pues sí, ya. Que me chillen con los niños aquí. Iba a iniciar un de Noé, pero yo sé, pues ya que, güey, también lo medité muchas veces. Y andaban ya que ya el güey, la neta. Todos los días ya andaban en el avión.
No puedo creer, güey, eso que me estás diciendo, güey, también pinches estúpidos a la verga.
Sí, güey, yo también, no sé.
Nuestros no pudieron ver estado tanto pinche tiempo que son alrededor, güey.
No sé, güey, pues no sé qué horrible. Ahorita ni eso en las noticias y pues sí, eso, güey, ya saben el color y en qué andaban.
¿Y saben cuántos eran?
Sí, 2. Dicen que
No diga tanto detalle, güey, nomás estoy pintando otra vez con raro, güey, no diga tanto detalle.
Sí, aquí. Y nos pagan, no hay. No quiero ni el culo.
Los números
No sé, pero quiero saber todo aquí al cantón, güey, ¿sabes? Pero no lo quiero meter ahí.
¿Por dónde compraste ese truco, güey? ¿Por dónde estaba? Eso.
Allá por el...
¿Quién tira por allá? ¿Quién tira por allá?
El Noé. Por Noé. Ahí por esa área. Con el Noé.
Pero había una por ahí.
Había pajaritos vienda. Dicen que...
Te digo, güey.
Sí, güey, que había pajaritos allí.
¿No sí ya salió, no?
No, sí, no, güey. O sea, que no lo ven esos güeyes.
Ya salió, güey.
El niño le va a hablar, güey, no malos, güey, no le culero.
Ya apenas que te iba a pedir unos códigos.
Si te puedo poner, güey, pues tengo una regla.
No, pues es que llegó un güey.
Sí.
Y llegó con unos leños de hierba. Pero pues tú sabes que son madres están caras aquí, güey, están a 20 euros cada cigarrillo.
Ya casi no.
Pero es
¿Tú
que
sabes, pero...
como es del barrio, me están dando 3 por los 40.
También, güey, pues sí te lo puedo poner, güey, que te lo ponga a tu ruta, güey, de la serie.
No, pues es que ese pedo no puedo tener mi libro ni todo que te pagas a la ruta para que le hagas el dinero a la ruta de este güey.
Pues tú sabes.
Pero pues si puedes, porque con esto, pues si te la quedas mejor ni pa' qué, no te una vuelta.
No, pues ya el Pili nos tiró paro con la cirugía y eso.
que está en pendejo, güey, no mames, güey.
Yo sé, güey,
Luego
yo
ya
le
aquí,
decía,
por algo pasan las cosas, güey, si no era que a lo mejor
le
estuviera,
dije,
a lo mejor estuviera yo ahí involucrado.
sí, güey, le dije que le hace mal a la casa, que no me iban a las calles, y lo tengo que andar me decía que se va a la casa y no le contestaba.
Su madre, güey, no, tú capites, güey.
Yo sé, güey, que sí, la neta sí, güey, pues tampoco pues, lo que da
Y disfruté de chilling con él, y no, que dura, güey, nomás dura como la mitad de
Un
un
mes.
mes, güey. Y ya después me entregué todo para salir y encontrarla ahí, güey, para ir a...
No sé lo que le dije. Pues ya todo, pero ya puedo para adelante, pues salí con el güey, que me pedo.
No, me sabe muy bien, güey, necesito que te dame las vueltas a mi jefa, güey, que mi jefa anda en el hospital y no quiero que se me vaya a quitar y se me va a poner, se va a enfermar mi jefa, güey, por este jale, güey. Pues mira,
Pues yo sé que sí, güey, pero
nomás vino a hacer puros problemas y estrés, güey, lo voy a encerrar, güey.
pues sí, güey, tengo que... Pues les digo a ustedes, güey,
¿Qué
que
está en mi
sí.
cuarto, güey?
Nada, nomás los niños se metían.
Ahí está y todo, ahí está ahí una tabla y eso.
Sí, por la teleta era mesota.
Te voy a mandar a mi ruca que va a salir, va a vivir ahí porque más temprano andaba peleando con la mamá y luego la mamá la corrió ayer, güey, y eso, pero no se quería ir para allá porque ya sabes, tu tío andaba de loco, haciendo eventos y todo.
Sí.
Pues hasta que tenga mamá con quien hablar y eso, güey.
Ah, pues yo me iba a venir con todo esto para acá porque...
Pues si te
Pues
vas,
yo no.
pues cuando les entregan en la casa, güey.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Ya para la otra semana, güey, según.
Ya.
Pues yo no a venirme porque todas las nenas han agüitado tan llamadas. Y pues nada, no con ella.
Mira,
No.
yo te hablo para darte el número a quien vas a tocar, güey.
Bueno.
Claro.
Thank you for using Go.
Okay, Steve?
So Judge, what's telling about this call, and really, I mean, the second half, like the last maybe 3-ish minutes, not really as relevant because the point they're talking about going some jail or whatever, I don't care about that. But what I'm looking at is the initiation of the call. And just to be clear, this is a discussion between Ricardo and Eric Baron. We're brothers, and they're talking about what had happened. And Ricardo's asking him, he told me, or he's telling Eric, he told me to get rid of everything and for him to keep the money. And then they start talking about the rims on the truck. There's a point, so it's really kind of broken down into 3 parts, generally the way I see it. It's talking about getting rid of everything. Then they talk about what exactly those items were, or what items were involved, because they say at some point I think this is Ricardo to Eric, he had the original on it, and then I told Isaac not to listen, so Isaac's name comes directly up. Then they start talking about actually stealing and throwing the tire, which is what we heard testimony about. We have that discussion. And then the third part, so that's the first 2, is get rid of it, talking about what happened and items. And then the third part is, but I want you to get rid of everything. So he says that again after. I was thinking it could have been potentially problematic if he's saying, well, get rid of everything, and then they just start talking about what happened, because then it doesn't really contextualize, or there's less of a nexus. But because he's saying, get rid of it, here's what happened, and then I need to get rid of everything, it's, again, I think, admissible under 801 as a furtherance of a conspiracy, because they're actually talking about, disposing of evidence and tampering with evidence by moving it. And so it's made by a party's co-conspirator enduring in furtherance of a conspiracy. I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that. And so I think even though we don't have the defendant making any admissions here, we certainly have 2 individuals who have knowledge We have two individuals who discuss what items specifically need to go. They talk about the 22s. They also talk about the original rims. And then they talk about, I need to get rid of everything. This is very, very similar to the testimony we heard from Carla talking about what Liz had said, because it is a person who's talking about or who has knowledge and who is in furthering or who is actively engaged in a conspiracy to commit criminal acts, which in this case is the destruction of evidence. So we feel for those reasons it's admissible. We can redact certain portions of the recording to get rid of like the talk about the grass sticks or joints or whatever they refer to it.
Okay, defense?
Judge, this is just another call that doesn't involve Mr. Talamantes. It's a call, perhaps there's a conspiracy between Eric and Ricardo, but to have it brought in on this case involving Mr. Talamantes, when he's not a party to this conversation, and, you know, there may be an evidence of a conspiracy between two people for some other case, but with respect to this case, this is really prejudicial. He's not a part of this conversation. He's not making admissions. This is something two random people are discussing, and I don't think it's particularly clear. Conversations about, well, I don't know. I mean, I just think it doesn't involve Mr. Talamantes. He's not a part of that conversation. The fact that there are a couple of people, one in jail, that are discussing something that may or may not have anything to do with this case is highly prejudicial against him in his case.
I mean, I can see the nexus. I'm just looking at this because it's 11:58, and I want to go at noon, so that way I can let the court monitor go to recess, so that way when I come back from my docket calls, we have somebody here. For this one, and also for number 7, I'll reserve ruling. I do see that there's a nexus there as far as eliminating one for the co-conspirator, but I need to think about whether it's a conspiracy between Eric giving directions to Ricardo on behalf of Lisa or on behalf of Luis, and that's something that I just have to think about over the weekend.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, that's fine, go ahead.
I would leave you with this, Judge, and you have to consider it in light, not just in a vacuum of the recordings themselves, but we're asking you to look at it in light of the evidence that we've already heard. And what we do know at this point is that the defendant took the Jeep to Lisa, to Elizabeth's house, which then was the starting point for the tampering with evidence and the conspiracy to tamper with evidence. So if I may give you an analogy, I stab somebody here in the courtroom, I walk over to Miss Staley and I say, here's the pin that I just stabbed him with. I gotta go. And I bolt. Suddenly Miss Staley's having a conversation with Casey about how they're gonna get, oh my God, did you just see him stab that guy? We gotta get rid of this pin. I gave it to them to get rid of. They start talking about how they're gonna get rid of it. So it's a furtherance and continuation of that initiation.
And that's why I'm saying I have to think about whether this was a conspiracy between Ricardo, or I guess between Eric and Lisa, or between Eric, Lisa, and Luis. Because Luis, the information that I have so far, I have to think about whether there's been enough testimony to say that he was knowing that this conspiracy was made on his behalf, or whether Lisa was acting as a maternal figure and taking him to Texas. And so that's what I'm thinking about over the weekend for numbers 5, 6, and 7.
Okay. So I guess we don't necessarily have to play 7 if the court's just going to be reviewing it on your own.
Yeah, we can discuss that on Monday. I think it's the same kind of issue because that's a phone call between Eric and Ricardo.
Got it.
Anything further from the state before we break for lunch?
No, you're not.
Well, before we break for the day.
For the day.
Anything further from defense?
No.
Okay. And if you both want to brief on how these are either not admissible or admissible, you can certainly do that over the weekend. If you send it to Michelle, she'll just forward it over to me. With that being said, we are in recess.
Oh, real quick, before we go off record, we're going to mark this as State's Exhibit number, these recordings as they are now.
Okay.
1 what?
147.
This will be 147, and once we get a ruling from the court, we can just either likely have like a 147A or something like
Is
that.
it that way?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know what it is.
And we'll be in 338 on Monday. And I'm going to stay there at 9 since we don't have a jury here. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. You're okay.
Sure, that noise.
I know. Okay. I'll be back. Enjoy your lunch. Do you know where yeah, I don't know. So we're just trying to see, like, do we take all the things? Oh, no. Let me check.